Hey everyone, I'm your host Courtney O'Steen and you're watching The People Project. Don't forget to like and share this video with someone that you think could find it valuable. Thank you to the incredible individuals who have made this series possible. Without you, there wouldn't be a project.
Okay, my name is Walter Cheeks, and I live in California.
Nice. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and talking to me about something that I think is very important, and not only just the nation, but in our world right now.
Yeah.
We had a really great conversation, and it actually sparked this series that I'm about to start, and you were the first person that I'm interviewing.
Oh.
And I have a list of people that I've been asking to participate, and I was just really honored that you would share your time with me and help educate others on some things that I've always been very curious on, that are questions that just don't get answered, because I think a lot of times the media is very skewed, especially mainstream media, and we don't get to have really good conversations that are important and vital towards our growth as a society.
I agree.
Thank you so much for your time today. We're going to start with one of the three questions. So for those of you who are watching, I've sent each participant the same exact questions. And I think that's the most accurate way to gather information, is by just having the same three questions that we ask. And this is each person's individual experience, so answers, of course, are going to vary. And I think that's what's important, is when we have conversations at the dinner table, so to speak, that we are better listeners than we are speakers, because that's how we can learn more about each other. So, Walter, the first question is, what has your personal experience with racism been?
Well, my personal experience with racism probably started when I was just a little kid, and I remember we moved to a new neighborhood, and when we were little, kids played. You went outside and you played, and you just met other kids in the neighborhood. And I remember when I was about 10, we had moved to a new city, and we were playing with some kids, and it was a young white guy and his sister. And I remember we played for weeks, because then you went to anyone's house or anything. But the first time I went to his house, to their house, the next day they told me they couldn't play with me anymore, and I had no idea why. And as a little kid, you're just like, well, we're having so much fun. Why can't we play together? And their dad just said they couldn't play with black kids.
Wow.
So that was my first experience with, obvious, overt racism. From there, it kind of went to interactions with the police as I became a teenager. Mm-hmm. Just getting stopped by the police for no real reason. Just walking the neighborhood, or walking to school, or playing in the park, and someone thought we were too loud. And and when you're teenagers, you're in the 80s, your interaction with police when you're black wasn't always nice, because you never knew what kind of cop was going to come up. Sometimes it was a very nice police officer. Hey, you guys being a little loud, can you guys keep it down? Sure, no problem. Hey, you guys are skateboarding somewhere you shouldn't be skateboarding. There's a park over here, take it over there. But then there were other officers who were just overtly racist. Would call us niggers, and say say we're good for nothing, and we don't belong in this neighborhood. And my family always had a little bit of money. We always lived in really nice upper middle class neighborhoods, and the police weren't always nice, and there weren't always a lot of black families there, so you kind of hung out together, because you kind of had to have each other's back. And after high school, it just kind of got worse, because this was the late 80s, early 90s, and there was this really big push to be tough on crime, There was a huge crack epidemic, which I wasn't part of, or none of my friends were part of, but we kind of got, scooped up into that just because of the fact that we were black. I remember one night we went to 17, 9 o'clock after, to 9, 10 o'clock after a football game. And we're at this place, a little taco stand. And the cops roll up because supposedly they thought we were gang members. Never was. We get slammed on the ground, cuffed. We sit there for hours while they, run our IDs, trying to figure out who we are, just looking for any excuse to arrest us. And if you've never been handcuffed and sat on the curb, it's really embarrassing when traffic's just wheezing by and everybody's thinking, look at those criminals. And you're not. So, and it just kind of got that way, with interactions with the police. You just never knew which cop you were going to get. If you were just going to get a nice cop who's just doing his job, and maybe you did have a tail light out, or maybe you did. And even though we're in California, there's some cities here that were really, their police forces were really serious about black people not coming there in town. I mean, Covina was one city where we just knew, as a black or brown person, you don't go there. And I made the mistake of driving through that city one night, trying to get to a friend's house. And as soon as I crossed over into the city, I got pulled over. Absolutely no reason. They wouldn't tell me why they pulled me over. Sat me on the curb, handcuffed, ran my license. Took my brother's car. I was driving my brother's car. Took it apart. Took the seats out, everything. All his stuff sitting on the curb, all his stuff out of the trunk sitting there. Didn't find anything. Supposedly they were looking for drugs, so they brought a drug dog. Didn't find anything. And they just uncuffed me and said I could go. All my stuff's still sitting there. They didn't put anything back. And they just told me I'm not welcome in Covina. So I just knew growing up that was not a place that I was welcome. So, yeah.
I remember that was the conversation that really drew me closer to what you were saying. And I thought, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. My interaction with law enforcement has been very minimal. And as a mom who has a 20-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son, I couldn't even imagine them being pulled over and harassed. And it's just a conversation that I really appreciated, your transparency, and for lack of better words, a looking glass into your experiences. And I thought, well, something's got to change. I mean, that can't be something that becomes acceptable and a societal norm. Like, that's not something we should just say, well, I mean, that's okay. I mean, it didn't happen to me, so it's not that big of a deal. And the whole thing is, you have to put yourself in that position. If that happened to me, would that be okay? If that happened to my children, how would I feel? Because at the end of the day, you're someone's child. Like, exactly. You're a grown man, but you're somebody's child. Exactly. And that particular story, when you talked about them taking apart your brother's car, I think it was a Bug, if I remember correctly.
Convertible Volkswagen Bug, yeah.
And then you have your brother's car, and now you have to explain to him. His brother, like, hey, so I was just going to Covina, and they disassembled your vehicle.
And the sad part is, even when I told him, he wasn't mad because he knew. He had already known. And, when you grow up black, your parents and your relatives have conversations with you. Like, I have conversations with my nephews about interactions with police officers. When you're black, you have to be perfect. You can't make a mistake. You can't raise your voice to a cop. You can't question a cop. Anything that you do is perceived as being, for lack of a better word, ungrateful. So, I tell my nephews, put your hands on the wheels, make sure your wallet's on the dashboard. so you don't have to get anything. If your registration, keep it in your visor, not in your glove compartment, because you don't want to be caught reaching into your glove compartment and a cop thinks he sees something and shoots you, because chances are he's going to get off and you're going to be dead. So it's just different. It's just different.
Thank you for sharing that experience. If you'd like to add anything to your personal experience, I'd like you to go ahead. Otherwise, we can move to the next question.
Well, other than direct racism with like police officers, the other big issue is institutionalized racism. You know, bank loans. I remember when I first started my IT business, I was trying to get a loan at the bank, and I went in, and it was just for $10,000, and I already had 5 as collateral. So I thought, this is going to be easy. I'll just go in.
Sure.
And at the time, I was banking with Bank of America, and I went in, yeah, and they said this was, you know, they said, no, we don't have any loans that fit you right now. And so I thought, okay, not a big deal. You know, I'll figure something else out.
Right.
And so I left, and then I decided, well, since I have this $5,000, I'll just go ahead and put it back in the bank. And when I came in, I could hear the loan officer talking to a guy who was just starting his business, and he was talking about, you know, how he needs money. He didn't have any collateral, white guy. And she's like, yeah, I think we can help you out.
Oh, wow.
And I walked over to her and I said, you can help him out. He just said he doesn't have any collateral, but he wants this loan. And I told you I have $5,000 for this, and you told me you didn't have any loans for me. And she was very, you know, like embarrassed by the whole thing. And I talked to the branch manager, and she assured me, oh, well, you know, maybe we can help you out, this and that. But at that point, it was just like, I don't want to bank with you anymore. This is ridiculous. And I haven't banked with him since. And I had a similar experience with Wells Fargo. So I don't bank with those banks. So I found banks, smaller banks, that, you know, had no issue with giving me loans, had no issue with, you know, looking at me as a person, as my credit score, as my credit history, and not as a black man standing in front of him asking for a loan. So
right. Judging you by a fair scale, right?
Yeah, that's all I want. Just judge me by the content of my character, not the color of my skin.
Well, and with credit, it should be pretty plain and simple. I mean, it's non-discriminatory. It's, if you don't have a score above this, we can't help you out. I could understand that, right? And you could even take it out and say, you know, between 700 and higher, we're able to loan to you this amount. Between 800 and this, we can loan to you this amount with this type of collateral. Not because, you know, well, you're black, so unfortunately we just can't help you today.
Well, you would think it would be that easy, but it's been documented that it's just not. I mean, if you look at some of the reports that came out from the federal government about the type of loans that were offered to black people, you know, before the 2008 housing crisis, if you were black and you had the exact same credit score as a white person, you were 5 times more likely to get put into a crappy loan than a conventional loan, you know, interest only, you know, these are, you know, ridiculous loans that these people they shouldn't be getting based on their credit score, but because they're black, they got pushed into these higher, more risky loans, you know, higher interest rates, more risky loans. And the only difference between these people, because their credit scores are the same, their credit worthiness was the same, the only difference is skin color. Skin color. And that goes back to, I don't know, you know, you're in real estate, but there used to be redlining, and my parents used to tell me about it. They just didn't sell houses in certain neighborhoods to black people. And basically the banks just literally looked at a map in a red pen, circled the neighborhoods that black people can buy houses in.
Right.
And that's not new. It's basically still going on today. And it's not as direct. It's a lot more subtle. I have a friend who tried to buy a house in my neighborhood, and when he went to this real estate agent, he had plenty of money, great credit. She didn't show him any houses in my neighborhood. She showed him houses in lesser parts of my city, and he's like, "This is ridiculous." And so we got a new agent, and
Absolutely.
yeah, so it still goes on. It's just a lot more subtle.
I fired a client before because they kept kind of circling around, and they said, well, you know, we really want to be in a safe neighborhood. I said, great. The best way for you to do that is contact your local police department and ask them about this area that you're interested in living in. I am not licensed to give advice on what's safe, what's not, but I can show you some great houses. Well, you know what we mean, Courtney. And I said, I don't know that I do know what you mean. And I said, I'm so sorry. I said, maybe you could explain a little bit further. Well, you know, we don't want to live in one of those black neighborhoods. And I thought, okay. And I said, well, then you don't want to be working with me. I said, because I'm just not the right agent for you. And I was really taken aback, and I thought, you really just said those words. And I thought, and if that's how you're choosing your neighbors, I want you as far away from me as possible. And I mean, I'm not allowed to tell you where you can live in Canada, but I wanted to circle where I lived and write, you can't be anywhere within this area. I don't want to be neighbors with you.
Yeah, those people exist, and they're very real. I just happen to live in a really good neighborhood, and the police officers in my neighborhood are really nice. But I've had the cops called on me jogging in my neighborhood because they got a call about a suspicious person.
We just have to do better. We just have to do better.
Yeah, people just have to do better, and you know, I don't know how long that's going to take.
What do you think the biggest misconception is about privilege?
The biggest misconception about white privilege is that white people think it doesn't exist. And I can totally understand why they think it doesn't exist, because I think when you're white in America, you're brought up with this ignorance to racism. It doesn't affect you. Little things, just, you know, that you just take for granted, that, you know, I can go to school, I can work hard, and, you know, I'll get a good job and everything's going to work out.
Right.
But when you're a person of color, yeah, you can work hard, but there's still this boss who isn't going to hire you because you're black. There are people who won't, you know, if you have an ethnic name, they won't even, they'll just see it on your resume and not even call you. There's, you know, I'm a well-spoken person, and there's been plenty of times when I've, you know, had jobs, and someone, you know, they'll say something extremely racist about black people, and then they'll qualify it by saying, you know, they're not like you. You're one of the good ones. Exactly. What's that supposed to mean? So white people sometimes just don't think that they're racist. And I hear this all the time. They say, I don't see color. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, if you don't see color, there's absolutely no way that you can see and empathize with my experience in life, because my experience is different than yours. Yeah, you can walk into the store and pick up every expensive item and decide not to get anything and walk out and be just fine. But if I walk in that same store, the security guard's probably going to follow me around. The sales lady's probably going to keep a better eye on me. I may get, you know, asked if there's something specific I'm looking for 20 times. You know, there are places where I just can't walk around the store and, you know, decide not to buy anything without basically feeling like I'm a criminal trying to steal something. And that's a reality for a lot of black people. It just is. And you just kind of, I don't want to say you just get used to it, but, you know, it's just the way it is. It's just, you know, it really is. It's just the way it is.
But it's not acceptable. We should all be greeted the same when we walk into a store and ask the same questions. Is there anything I can help you find today? And that's it. Plain and simple, right?
It should be. It should be, but it's not. Part of that's because of, you know, the media and the way they portray black people. I mean, this country has a long history of portraying black people, especially black men, as being violent, out of control, rapists. I mean, there are literally presidential candidates who've been elected on the idea of, we're going to keep black men in line. So, I mean, and it's not, just Republicans, it's Democrats too. Bill Clinton's crime bill, that was completely racist. This mandatory minimums takes the ability of judges to look at individual cases and say, okay, there's all these, other things that are going on in this case, and this shouldn't be how this person is being charged, or this is, too harsh of a penalty. There was a case that just was recently in the news, and it was, I think it was 4 black men. 3 of them were like in their 20s. And then there was this 15-year-old kid in the neighborhood that they convinced to be a part of this crime, that they were going to go, they manipulated this poor little kid into taking part in this crime. Well, a cop shot one of the guys. And under the current guidelines, every guy who is part of the crime is charged with murder, even though the cop shot the guy. So there's this 15-year-old kid who's now going to do life in prison because of mandatory minimums, and there's no discretion given to a judge. And even the judge in the case said, this is ridiculous, but there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. But the way the system is set up right now, it's stupid. It's kind of stupid. In the 80s, when the crack epidemic was going on,
Right.
Everyone was using cocaine. And if you look at FBI crime statistics, white people and black people use drugs at about the same rate. Mm-hmm. But black people are like 7 times more likely to get arrested and get a harsher sentence than white people. In the 80s, they made having it like a little bit of crack 20, 30 years. You had 5 times the amount of powder cocaine, and it was almost a misdemeanor, and you could just pay a fine and walk out of jail. And the reason was because black people used crack and white people snorted cocaine. And that's institutional racism. The drug is the exact same. One is just smoked and one is just snorted. It's the exact same drug, but based on who was using that drug, you got different penalties. Today we have the opioid epidemic, which predominantly affects white people.
Yes.
It's decimating the Midwest. But instead of being harsh on crime and asking for longer sentences for opioid addicts, the government's position now is it's a medical issue. We need to get these people treatment. And the truth is, the only reason they want to get them treatment is because they're white. If they were black, they'd be, let's throw the book at them. This is personal responsibility, and you're using this drug, and you should go to prison.
Right.
So there's this built-in institutional racism in this country that has to change. That it just affects so much of everybody's life who isn't white.
And it just goes back to the conversation about the bank, right? Just we're using the same set of rules and laws to apply for everyone.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that'd be a really good starting point and a really simple way to execute things. And our conversations have always been very eye-opening to me, because ignorantly, I hope in my heart that everyone is treated the same way.
Yeah.
But it's not until you have conversations like this where you get to uncover truth and say, well, that's not my experience, so that shouldn't be your experience. And that's common sense to me. That shouldn't be your experience because it's not mine. But it is. Your experience is very different from what mine is. And Black men and women who have experienced drugs, which I haven't, but if they have and they've had a run-in with the law, they should have the same sentence as white person. Plain and simple. If X amount of cocaine equals X amount of time, then that's the time you should serve. Plain and simple. That should be the only thing that we use to measure.
It should be, but it's not.
The metric shouldn't be skewed.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, but it is. It goes back to, white people hate when I talk about this, but This harkens all the way back to slavery and the end of slavery. When the 13th Amendment was drafted, the 13th Amendment basically says that you can't have slavery in the United States with the exception of punishment for a crime. So the southern states took that little line in the 13th Amendment and realized that just because slavery's ended, we still need all this free labor. So we need to figure out a way to make that happen. So they started what were called Jim Crow laws, which were basically the police rounding up black men on trumped up charges and judges giving them extraordinary sentences for ridiculous crimes that they didn't commit so that they could get them back in prison and they could get their free labor. Because even today, prisoners are manufacturing all kinds of things in this country.
Oh, so much more than people realize.
Yeah.
I think people think they just sit in there and hang out and work out and go eat. And
they're not. They're manufacturing clothes for Victoria's Secret, for Nike, for all these big, all these big manufacturers are getting this discounted or almost free labor. Yeah. And in order to keep that going, you need bodies. We have, these for-profit prisons in this country, which is crazy because if you look at the charters or you look at the minutes of their corporate meetings, they say there's no way we can stay in business unless we get more bodies in our prisons. And so they take their money, they lobby Congress for tougher laws, which predominantly affect minority people because that's where the police usually patrol. They don't, if you're not looking for drugs in Beverly Hills, I mean, no one's pulling a Bentley over and, searching it for drugs. It's just not happening.
Something interesting I don't know if you're aware of, but I volunteer with United Way. And one of the things, one of the executives there brought to my attention was by, I believe it's 4th grade. By 4th grade, if you were not reading at grade level, they will determine how many prison beds they will need by that exact statistic. And we find the majority of the time, it's our minority families that are not meeting those markers because they're not being offered the same opportunities. And what I mean by that, before everyone gets excited that's watching the video and you're like, we all go to public school, we all have the same opportunities. This is what I mean. There are kids that need help outside of school, plain and simple.
Yeah.
Their regular 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., 8 to 3, whatever hours your kids goes to school, that people cannot afford the means for one-on-one tutoring. They don't have the resources to drive their child there to get them to where they need to be. So they're stuck in what our district calls Kid Central. It's an after-school program, which is great. There is an adult there to make sure your kid basically just doesn't die. I mean, they're not doing no one-on-one, but they're making sure that your child is safe in that environment. But they're not getting that one-on-one tutoring that maybe another child's family could afford to do. So when that was brought to light for me by United Way, I said, that's not okay. Something has to change. We're basing prison beds off how many children have their literacy on with markers. And why do these kids not have their literacy on with their mile markers is because they're not provided the same tools and opportunities.
Exactly.
And that to me was showing just one example of what white privilege could look like and what it is.
Yeah.
And I just had no clue. And it was until you know better, you can't do better, right? So I grew up in a very comfortable home and I didn't really have to want for much as far as financials. Now, I don't know if you knew, but I came from a very, very abusive family, physically, mentally, and verbally. But I grew up in a great neighborhood with great people, and I didn't have to wish for anything. And I met all my milestones, so to speak. So finding out as an adult that the playing field isn't level made me not only sad, but it made me really angry.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes us angry too. And speaking of schools aren't equal. Even though they're all public schools, a lot of school funding is tied to property taxes.
Yes.
And if you're in a wealthy neighborhood, your school's getting more funding than this inner city school, which has many more students, much fewer teachers, much fewer resources. If it was all fair, all the money would go in a pot and go equally to all the schools. But white people never have that. There's no way. There's no way they would want their money, less money for their schools, more money for, underserved schools, so that all schools could be equal. In our country, white people aren't going to give that up. They like that status. And I'm not, when I say white people, I don't mean every white person. Certainly not every white person is racist, and certainly not every white person feels this way. But there is literally powerful organizations that want to keep the status quo the way it is.
Right.
If all schools are public, all schools should get the same funding. And
100% yes, because when I go speak to those kids and I read, when I'm in my quote unquote lower economic areas, I am floored by the lack of resources that they have. And it's as simple as pulling up into the parking lot. And I encourage anyone who's watching this that has never seen a poor school, get in your freaking car, man, and drive outside your comfort zone and volunteer at school in a lower economic area. And then it's real eye-opening, because the second you hit that parking lot, you notice it's different. The second you hit that parking lot, because the asphalt is falling apart, there are weeds growing out of that parking lot. The sign, the marquee on the front of the school is missing all sorts of letters.
Yeah.
And I mean, you get that in high-end areas as well too, but it's fixed right away, right?
Yeah.
It's fixed right away. No one is letting that tagging sitting there. No one is letting the crack in the asphalt go past how long a work order takes to be completed. No one is letting the weeds grow awry. No one is seeing the lack of resources, the lack of books, the lack of paper, the lack of pencils, basic supplies that everyone has the right to. Everyone has the right to. And then when you see collectively that it's not the same, that's when you should be angry and say, how do I make a change? Because that's always what it's been to make me go, this is wrong. And why do we let it happen? We need more people that are passionate instead of passive and saying, oh, well, that's just how it is in that neighborhood. Why is it okay that that's how it is in that neighborhood? There should be no oppression. There should be no division as far as anything goes. And can you start with the most basic concept of education, that we should all have the same tools? Because if that's where it starts, because sometimes I know as a parent, when I was a young mom, we only had the opportunity for both of us to work. It wasn't the opportunity for me to stay home, which I would have loved to do. So Kaylee, my daughter, has different experiences with Peyton, my son, because I got to be home with him. I was not afforded that luxury. But what do you do with single families? My mom's a single parent.
Yeah.
It turns to shit real quick when you're not home, because kids get in trouble. We hang around with the wrong people, we make wrong decisions, we do stupid things. And I will tell you, Walter, because I was white, I didn't get in the same trouble as my other friends did.
Yeah, exactly. My white friends never got in the same, even though we all hung out together, they never got in the same trouble as I did, even though I was much better than them. They were in the way more crazy stuff that they should have gotten in trouble for, but they got off on it. I had a friend in high school, drunk. She was completely drunk driving, 16 years old, completely drunk. Did they take her to jail? No, they just brought her home to her parents. But one of my guy friends, he had just 2 beers. He tested, he blew .08, went to jail, had to go to court, had to do all this DUI stuff, spent thousands of dollars to get this. And it's, it's on his permanent record. People, they just treat you different based on skin color. Not always, but a lot of the time.
Right.
A lot of the time. They just do. It's just a fact. It's just a fact in our country that has to change, but I'm not 100% sure how it's going to change, because you can't, I know you can't change a person's heart, but I believe we can change the institutions. We can make the institutions fair, and that'll mitigate individuals being biased. If we could just get the institutions to be fair, and a lot of them just aren't fair. They just aren't.
I agree. And my closing question for you is, what do you wish your non-people of color, your friends, colleagues, and acquaintances could understand about racism and racial injustice?
If I could only pick one thing that I wanted white people to understand, is that black people haven't always been seen the way they're seen now. Poor, inner city, all these people, they're uneducated, they're unwilling to work and do all this. After slavery ended, there were towns in cities that were all black, completely, all black. Every store was black, every bank was black, but everywhere you went, black. The money stayed. When you read some of the books and the stories, they talk about how a dollar would stay in that town for as long as 5 years before it left that town, because people just bought from each other, because the racism was still there. So they just built their own communities. Well, there was a point in this country that's never talked about in our history books where unprosperous white towns would have an excuse to basically burn down and decimate black towns. There were towns like Tulsa, which is Black Wall Street, if you want to look it up. There was the Rosewood Massacre. There was the Springfield Massacre. I mean, entire cities were decimated because of, I think in Tulsa, what happened was supposedly there was a little black boy in an elevator who looked at a white woman wrong. White crowd came to the black town, arrested him, and so the black people of the town, at the time, most black people had guns. So a bunch of black men went to the jail to get this boy. He shouldn't be in there for just looking at a white woman. Mm. Well, the white town wasn't doing well financially. So they took this opportunity to go to the black town and basically burn it to the ground. And this happened in dozens of black towns after slavery ended. This was the early 1900s. After that, it just got kind of just worse, because if you're you tell us we're free, we can do what we want, and then we become prosperous, and then you take all that away. And black people, even then, they didn't get to the point where they just felt like we got to just kill all white people. It just never got to that point. They thought, okay, we just got to do it differently. And they did. They started, other towns, worked hard, stayed in their communities. But even when we tried to, my grandfather, when we grew up in Mississippi, and the town we live in is called Bel Air, and it's a really upscale black neighborhood. Okay. But he wanted to buy in, this is after World War II, because he was in the Army, and after he got out of the Army, he had a lot of money. He had saved up his money, plus he had some businesses and things like that. And so he wanted to, the government started building, basically suburbs. They had told builders, we're going to give you all this money to start building these suburbs. But black people weren't allowed to buy in the suburbs because the government literally had in the builder contracts that you couldn't sell to black people. And in the contract that the white people who bought the houses had, it said you couldn't sell your house to black people. So white people got this advantage of buying these homes that, gained equity. You could take money out of that equity and send your kids to college, take money out, let your kid buy a house.
Right.
Black people didn't have those opportunities because we got stuck in cities that governments just didn't invest in. You couldn't get government money into a black city. So your town didn't prosper and grow like the white ones did. So when white people think that, when you talk about this advantage that white people have, this is what we're talking about. Your parents, your grandparents had this huge advantage that we didn't have. We're basically starting. You're starting the race. We're running a 100-meter race. You're starting already at the 50. We're starting way back at the starting line. The wealth after World War II that white people accumulated was huge. Black people didn't get that same opportunity to develop that wealth because the government never funded our cities. They never funded our businesses. Black people, everything that we have, you basically have to get on your own. You can't depend on. We know we can't depend on the government for anything. I started my 2 businesses without the government. No government help at all. Even when the stimulus just came out because of COVID. Most black businesses are sole proprietorships. They purposely left them off of the list of businesses that could qualify for the loans. And when it came out, they came back and said, "Oh, we got to fix this," and they fixed it. But it was left out on purpose. It wasn't an oversight. It was purposely left out. And those kind of things happen all the time. So, yeah, I just want white people to know that, yeah, all black people aren't bad. I know it looks that way in the media, but we aren't. You don't have to be scared. I see all this crap online about Antifa and all these organizations coming after white people, and black people have never come after you, ever. So what makes you think that's going to happen now? Most black people kill black people. I mean, you look at the statistics. Black people kill black people. White people kill white people. Yeah, sometimes there are, crimes that happen interracially, and those crimes are always blown up. But the vast majority of crime happens between neighbors. And that's just the truth. So I don't know. I have some ideas about how to fix some of this, but most of it, I don't know where we're going to go. I really don't. I looked at younger generation and just how many, when we marched for civil rights in the 60s and the 70s, right. It was mostly black people. It was mostly black people marching for their civil rights. But today, when I saw the protests, I mean, everybody was out there. Black people, white people, everybody. And I mean, that is so just heartwarming to think that this younger generation is so much better than ours. I think they're going to get it right. And they're just waiting for us to die off.
Well, I hope they do get it right. When I sit by my 13-year-old son and we're watching TV and he goes, "I don't understand why it's such a big deal if your skin's different color." And I think the innocence of those words are so powerful.
Exactly.
And if we just remember playing in the street with our friends when we're little and not seeing any color, it starts at home, and we have to be better at home.
Yeah.
We have to be better at home. And I really appreciate you sharing today and being vulnerable and having a conversation with me that needs to be heard by so many individuals. And my prayer for the nation is that we truly start listening better than we speak.
I hope so too.
And listening with an open heart and an unbiased opinion. And knowing that because you haven't experienced something in life doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So I thank you so much for your time. And if you have any final thoughts, I open the floor for you.
I think most people are good. And, we just, I understand being scared, but just be less scared. Just be a little bit more brave. And if you see bad, call it out. If you see something, that's not right, call it out. So many people are just silent and quiet, and they see stuff and they're like, well, what can I do? If we just start calling it out when we see it, I think a lot of it will change. So that's what I hope.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I just really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Courtney.
You're welcome.